and you can start sharing and take it over.
All right, thank you very much. You're going to stick around for the session, Steve?
Oh, of course.
Okay, and would you mind maybe monitoring the chat or
Yep. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, and just so you know, I have everybody muted. They can't talk until you say it's ready for questions, and then I open it up.
Okay, can they mute themselves?
They will once I unmute them.
Okay, okay. So okay, we'll cover that here briefly.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Looks like this is day 3, right, Steve? I signed up for this.
Yes.
Kind of just recently. First time doing this conference. Really excited about it. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Steve. My name is Omar Villarreal. I'm a cloud solution architect in engineering in the EDU organization at Microsoft. I'm here today to talk to you about DevOps, what it is, what it can do for you, and why it is important to your business and IT operations. Now, well, let me just go through these additional slides. So Steve just mentioned recording session is in progress. I would like to hear your questions. Please feel free to interrupt me. Raise your hand. Steve will be monitoring, or type your questions in the chat. I might ask you if the answer is coming. I might ask you to hold for an answer later on in the session. But please do ask your questions as soon as they come to mind. I will try to answer them right away while in context. Okay, this is Microsoft confidential material. No recordings, no pictures, please. You will have the opportunity to watch the session on a anonymous, private YouTube channel, right? Is that correct, Steve?
Yes.
Okay. The intention with this session is to understand the value proposition of DevOps and also to learn about we're going to have. This is a much longer session than the time that we have available for this, but we're gonna learn about a couple of different changes that organizations could benefit from or that they would have to need to implement to adopt DevOps and get value out of it. With that, I would like to tee off the presentation with a video, which we're going to refer to afterwards. I like to make my sessions interactive. So take a look at the video, please. For the sake of time, I set it to start a little bit, not from the beginning, a few seconds afterwards. You're just going to miss a car parking. Okay, we're going to start the video when the car already parked. Please pay attention to what's going on. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions after the video. Okay. All right, and here we go.
I don't think you clicked the button that said use system audio when you shared.
Pretty sure I did. Okay,
Might want to just try resharing again.
Yeah, let me stop it and I will reshare again. Yeah, I was. Okay, hang on. Can you hear it this time?
Yep.
Perfect. I don't know what happened. I was positive I actually did. As you were doing your intro, I checked that box. Okay, let's restart the video. Okay, ready? Pay attention. I'm gonna ask you after the video. It's about I don't know. It's not too long. I'm gonna ask you about what you observed. Okay, it's a before and after video of the Formula One races with the 50-year difference.
tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
67 seconds after he stopped. That was in 1950. What a difference. The first one was just 67 seconds in 1950 after he did the pit stop. Can we, Steve, can we come off mute? I would like to hear what anybody noticed. What's different? What caught your eye? What caught your attention?
Everybody has the
extremely
ability
relevant
to
for
come off
DevOps.
mute. Yep, everybody has the ability to come off mute. The thing I noticed different was they didn't polish his window in the second one. That's what took so long.
Good catch.
It's so fast. In the second one, I couldn't tell all that they were doing. They were all doing it at once. Did it take like 2 seconds? I mean, it's fantastic.
Everybody
That's
had a
fast.
purpose.
Yeah. What else? Come on. How about the black and white versus color? No?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed like, well, in the first one, the guys were still working when the guy was trying to pull away. I mean, it was like, it just seemed more improvised, and of course, technology was not as advanced as it is here.
Great catch.
So
Okay.
there's more specific jobs for everybody to do, and they streamlined it. I mean,
Yeah.
if this was
Yeah.
a script, then all of these guys are lines of code, I guess.
Yeah, I would have to say, what do you have? The mechanical devices to help get the tires off. You have the drills that are electric, right? All can be construed as automation.
Right. Technology, innovation. Right. Specific for the task. Right. Some innovations are more generic, right? Like the material on the tires, for instance. Oh, well, those apply to all cars, right? Improvement of the compound used to make tires, etc. But some of the innovations are specific for the Formula One racing. And you mentioned a couple of you guys mentioned a couple of things that I usually expect to hear, and when I've done this presentation before, I don't hear them. You mentioned everybody had, well, you mentioned the tools, right? The technology innovation. You mentioned more people, or you didn't say more people. You said more something. But
Everybody
yeah, I
has a
mean,
purpose.
everybody has a purpose. Yes. The one thing that changed in this specific scenario was that in the 1950s, the Formula One organizers, I think the limit was four pit crew members working at a time on a car. And as you can see, that I guess that rule changed because there's a lot more than 4 people here, right? But that had to come from the top, from the organizers. Again, everybody had a role. They didn't clean the windshield. That was a very good catch. What difference does it make if they clean the windshield? Do you think it makes a difference at those speeds?
Probably now the windshields are made of different materials that are better adapted to the climate. They don't have to.
Right. Mosquitoes just slide through, bounce off, right? They don't stick. But there is one key thing here that we miss every day. My background is in software development, but I've also done infrastructure and IT work. If we think about it, the objective here that everybody has is to get the car back on the track without predictable issues as soon as possible. Right? And that's a key point there, predictable issues. Okay? But the biggest takeaway here is something that we don't see often, and that is the location of the camera. More often than not, in my experience, organizations, everybody is so focused on their own role that we never take a step back to look at the overall process. You mentioned it, the process was improved. And like I said, from the 1950s to the 2000s, rules changed, right? The controls that management of the organization had in place changed. They also matured. They innovated the rules. But taking the time out of our busy day or our busy week, once a month, whenever it makes sense, to take a step back and stand where the camera is key to succeeding at DevOps. We're gonna talk about that. Okay. Well, I'm not gonna talk about that specifically. I'm mentioning it here so that you keep it in mind throughout the presentation. Okay. Any questions? Okay.
I guess one other point I'd make is that it was also well rehearsed.
Oh yeah.
Like sampling your code and testing it. They obviously did that beforehand. It was like a beautiful performance.
Yeah, and that talks to the comment that I made, and I have it written here. I was reading it. Okay, it's otherwise I will change it every time. The objective is to get the car back on the track without predictable issues as soon as possible. What's the point of that? Well, we want to win the race, right? There is no value, and this is a key word here in DevOps as well. There is no value being delivered to the customer, whoever the customer is in Formula One, right? A gambler, or a person placing a bet, or the sponsor of the car, right? Or the sponsors. There is no value in the car not being on the track, right? The value of the car is when it's on the track, trying to win. Okay, value is a key word here for DevOps. We're gonna bring it up a couple of times, including on our next slide. And anything else? Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's go ahead and go on mute, Steve. Or if you guys, it doesn't sound like there's any background noises. If you want to stay unmuted, that's fine. I think you can unmute yourselves and mute yourselves. So we're going to start with the definition of DevOps. At Microsoft, we state that DevOps is the union of people, processes, and tools, things that you mentioned, right? To enable continuous delivery of value to our customers. Okay? That is a very broad definition. Notice, please, that it is not product specific. You may be familiar with our Azure DevOps product. It has nothing to do with DevOps. DevOps is one thing. Azure DevOps is a piece of software that we offer. Okay, those two things get confused often, but I wanna make a clear distinction here. DevOps is not Azure DevOps. If you came to this presentation hoping to see Azure DevOps or any of its features, you're not going to see it. Okay? We're going to talk about DevOps. When we talk about, and I'm going to talk to you about the DevOps transformation that the Azure DevOps, the product group that made what used to be Team Foundation Server and what is now Azure DevOps. The product group themselves, they went through a DevOps journey. DevOps is a journey. It's a never-ending journey. When we talk about the Microsoft DevOps journey, I want to define or make a distinction again, like I just did, between DevOps and Microsoft. There are a large number of definitions out there on the internet. If you look up what DevOps is, they tend to focus on whatever the person writing that article works on, or it may be a marketing article from a specific vendor of a particular product. Okay, basically, depending on who wrote it, depending on who you're listening to, so to speak, that's going to be the definition of DevOps. That's not the definition that's on your screen right now. The definition on the screen is very, very generic, not product specific. Normally, you're going to find definitions that contain terms like automation, collaboration, monitoring. Those are going to be articles that come from a vendor that offers automation, collaboration, or monitoring, things like that. So very important to make a distinction that DevOps is not any particular piece of software. Okay. Instead of focusing on an individual technology or discipline, we use a holistic definition considering the ecosystem and the goals. Okay. DevOps is the union of people, processes, and tools to enable continuous delivery of value. So through some examples, today I'm going to talk to you about what DevOps is, what it can do for you, and why it is important to your business and IT operations. Okay. In a rapidly changing technological world, IT organizations that succeed are the ones that can change rapidly. DevOps enables an evolutionary rather than revolutionary approach to improvement. Why is that? Well, change takes time, right? But organizations that embrace DevOps become well adapted to the developing future. Change takes time. We're going to talk about here in a little bit how the Azure DevOps product group they started their journey in 2010, and they didn't really see a lot of the benefits until like 6-7 years later. So basically, it's about working smarter, not harder. Let the tools do the grunt and repetitive work. Let machines process so that you can focus on doing what you enjoy, right? That's, again, part of what DevOps is. Now, what are the benefits? In terms of DevOps adoption, organizations are classified. There's an independent study that is done every year. You can see at the bottom left of the slide, the DevOps, there's a study called the State of DevOps report. And that's where these numbers come from. These are outdated numbers, but the report is out. It's free. You can download it anytime. Just do a search for DORA, State of DevOps report. But in terms of DevOps adoption, organizations are classified in that report into different levels of performers, right? There used to be low, medium, high, and elite performers. They turned it back down to just 3 levels. But some of the things that make a superior performing DevOps organization are, for example, deployment frequency. These are the factors that they use in the study to determine how mature your organization is as in DevOps context. So deployment frequency, deploying changes to production once or less per month versus deploying multiple times per day on demand as needed. Okay, lead time for changes. How long does it take? Right? Being able to turn around and deliver on a customer's requirement in 1 to 6 months versus less than a month or even less than a week. And by delivering, meaning that the customer gives you their requirement, and that requirement is implemented and deployed and running in production, i.e., delivering value in a week or less. Okay, again, please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, okay? In order to become high performing in DevOps, IT staff needs to change the way they do things, the way they work. And this is, again, depending on the level of maturity of the organization. Traditionally, the things that we do are not in line with, they're usually, I mean, they're going to be in line with the 1950s part of the video versus the 2013 part of the video. And some of the things that need to change is how people interact, how they communicate, how they measure success. They have to change their behaviors, their actions, but most importantly, their mindset. Whoa. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Give me 1 second. My screen just flickered and PowerPoint went away. You can see my slide?
Yep. Digital transformation is people transformation.
Okay, give me 1 second, please. Okay, sorry about that. That was an interesting glitch. Anyway, mindset, culture, very important things that need to change. Okay, it's not just about automating my deployments. Okay, that to me, in my book, before you can start talking about jumping on a DevOps transformation or DevOps journey, you need to have deployment automation, or at the very least automated builds of your software that you write. If you're not there yet, you're not ready to start making any of the other changes. But once you're there, making change happen is harder than it looks. You basically, and this is an existing model for change. It's called the Lippitt-Knoster model for managing complex change. And it talks about all the factors that need to be in place for change to succeed, right? There needs to be a vision. There needs to be consensus. People need to be trained. There need to be incentives for people to adopt the changes. There need to be resources, and there needs to be an action plan. The thing is that all those factors have to be there in order for change to have a much higher chance of success. If we're missing any of those factors, as you can see on the slide, there's going to be it's going to be a big challenge. If you don't have a vision, people are going to be confused. Okay, well, where are we trying to go? Okay, what are we trying to change to, right? If there's no consensus, meaning everybody is informed, intentionally or unintentionally, there's going to be a sabotage of your change efforts. If there's no skills, if there's no training of the people that need to change, people are being asked to change, but they don't know how to do the new thing that they need to do. They're not going to know how to what to change to, right? Or even if they do, some are going to have different levels of understanding and are going to implement the change at different levels or shapes, right? So training is another key element. There need to be incentives, right? As humans, and it doesn't have to be monetary incentive. It's not like I'm going to give you a bonus if you put this change in place. more often than not, people will be incentivized by, hey, you know what? This is going to be automated. I'm not going to be doing this manually anymore. I'm gonna be able to go home at 5 o'clock. I'm not going to have to be here on weekends to do deployments. Those are things that motivate people more than money a lot of the time, right? But you need to identify, in order for change to occur, you need to identify and be clear about what those incentives are, and ask the people that you're trying to affect change on, and confirm. I mean, some people are motivated by different things, right? But the incentives need to be there. You need to know what those incentives need to be in order for change to occur. Resources. If you're telling somebody to automate deployments and you don't give them a tool to automate a deployment, well, guess what? There's going to be frustration, right? And if there is no action plan, there's no deadlines, there's no milestones, well, everybody's going to be going at their own pace, and change is going to be very, very ineffective if it ever occurs. Now, just like everything else, DevOps as a concept started a long time ago, but it is no longer bleeding edge. This is also a somewhat outdated chart. I was not able to get my hands around the latest one, but you can see DevOps at the top of the peak there. DevOps is no longer bleeding edge. If we look at history, there are a lot of new approaches that are tried, but few became standards. Many of them were fads, and while some organizations may still use them, they're not the norm. They did not produce lasting change broadly. There were a few that transcended the hype. And this chart that you're looking at, it's called the Gartner hype cycle. It's a proprietary chart that Gartner, as a research group, has identified that pretty much every innovation goes through. They all go through this curve, this cycle. No matter what it is, this is what the cycle looks like for pretty much everything. And some of them do. Some of the technologies or innovations, like the ones you're seeing there towards the right, they do transcend the cycle. And while DevOps was at the top of that peak of inflated expectations in 2015, it really has passed now. It is now, I dare to say, last time I checked, it was in the area where it says slope of enlightenment. I'm pretty sure it is now in the plateau of productivity. Companies in the community constantly producing new tools and extensions and software that is DevOps oriented. So DevOps is now the standard for superior performing organizations. Okay, DevOps is a practice. Companies that are adopting DevOps successfully are truly crushing the competition. Think about one race where one car has not gone through the innovation that you saw in the 2013. They're still doing things the 1950s way. Well, guess what? They're going to be crushed by the car that did innovate and adopted all these improvements. Now, Mr. Peter Drucker was the leading management consultant of the 20th century. He was widely known. Very large corporations hired him to improve. And he once said that businesses have two basic functions: marketing and innovation. And if they don't do at least one of those two well, they will not be around. In today's world, though, I would argue that IT departments, just borrowing from his statement, IT departments have two basic functions. And innovation has to be there, or you're going to get behind. You're going to be the 1950s car. DevOps can help you make sure that customers are satisfied as you innovate. Okay, the journey of DevOps adoption brings those things into the mix. Okay, the quality, the speed of delivering value, as well as making sure that you're constantly improving, constantly innovating. And the innovation doesn't have to be technology only, it can be processes. Like I said, the 1950s, they only allowed four crew members working on the car, and that had to change. That change was also innovation. It doesn't have to be technology innovation. It's just renewing something, right? Making it coming up with something new. DevOps helps you adapt to today's rapidly changing IT ecosystems and customer requirements effectively. So DevOps adoption smooths application development, as well as technology updates, no matter what it is. What DevOps allows you to do is make changes in a way that requires the least amount of manual work, rework, and it ensures that the people who need information have access to it when they need it. You deliver value faster and with improved quality without having unnecessary steps along the way, like the wiping of the windshield, right? Any questions? How are we doing on time, Steve? We have an hour, right?
Oh yeah, we still got 28 minutes.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to use a case study of, like I mentioned earlier, the Azure DevOps product group at Microsoft, an organization of 800 plus people, many like 48 different feature teams is what they're called. How they went. I'm going to share some examples from basically firsthand experience of the DevOps transformation that the product group went through, which is very much still going on today. And they started in 2010. So, and there's different areas. Again, we're going to cover only a few. When the Azure DevOps team was not high performing in 2010, this is what things look like. The team had an established cadence of releasing a new version of the product every 2 years. Anybody on the call familiar with Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio, and how, I mean, the initial release was in 2005. The next one, the next version was 2008. From 2008, they went to 2010, and then 2012, 2013. As you can notice there, the cadence changed a little bit, but that it's not enough to know how often or how long the release cycle was. Another thing that's important is like, well, you may have taken 3 years to release between 2005 and 2008, but how much? Did you have 3 years worth of work in there? Did you have 5 years worth of work maybe in those 3 years? Did you have 1 year worth of work, right? So the way they did things before was that they had an established cadence of releasing a new version of the product roughly every 2 years. Okay? And Microsoft had been successful using that approach forever. I mean, that's how it was. Office, Project, Outlook, all of those things. Heck, not just Microsoft. Everybody else did it that way. Agree? So the release cycle was broken into 3 activities. There was a planning stage or phase. It was thorough. It assumed that the upcoming 2 years were orderly and predictable. It defined what the, at the time, 400 plus person group was going to work on for the next 2 years. Sound familiar to anybody? The next activity was to implement the plan. The developers would begin work after the plan was complete and would keep working until the plan was fully implemented. After that, they would hand over their work to the testing or QA group for review and testing. The developers then and testers would work together to fix any bugs that they found. However, that was only to release a beta version of the product. The beta version was made available for customers to use. Customer feedback would be incorporated, right? The beta versions or pre-release versions are always intended to get feedback from our users. Customer feedback will be incorporated prior to the final release, if there was time to do so, prior to the scheduled release date. There was a deadline. Okay? Feedback that did not fit in the timeline would be relegated to future releases. Then the product was released according to the project plan, right? Had a perfect schedule. We knew exactly when the product was going to be ready and released. Any questions or comments on this? Okay. So functionality that customer wanted, or that came in through the feedback after using the beta release, could take 2 years or more before customers had it. That was very disappointing for our customers. It was discouraging for the product team members as well. And we would miss opportunities to deliver a better product because of that cycle that we had. So, hey, we had to tell our customers, hey, great feedback. Thank you very much. We're going to put it on the next release and we'll get it to you in a few years. I mean, that's literally what was happening. But was that a good approach? It was very good. That's how things were. Everybody was doing it that way, right? But there was an elephant in the room. Customers accepted it because they did not have a choice. Waiting for functionality was accepted as the norm. Anybody remember that? Anybody been there? I'm not seeing my Teams window, by the way, Stephen, if there's any reactions or comments. I only have 2 monitors. But as you're well aware, the pace of change in IT has been increasing over the last several years. The departments that succeed in the current environment are those that are able to adapt quickly and use their resources effectively. Does anybody here remember or know what happened to Blockbuster? Any idea? Any comments? No? Blockbuster took too long. Netflix came and took over the market. Blockbuster had streaming at some point. I had their subscription. I think they even had boxes like Redbox, but it was too late. They took too late to change, and they went out of business. Maybe not. Maybe it's not what happens to everybody, but in general, being nimble increases your chances of success. So, to illustrate the change with what's different now several years later, planning used to be a long process. Imagine sitting down today to write a detailed specifications document. You define the work that you want to be done on month 1. You take a whole month to define the work in a requirements or specification documentation. Month 1 of the project, month 2, month 6, 12, and 24. I mean, you're putting in the plan what you want to happen for the next 2 years. That's going to take some time. Just to write that is going to take some time. It's going to delay the start of the implementation. Right? In the meantime, developers are waiting for that document. And it's going to be 18 months before the development team starts implementing what I like calling the later chapters of your specifications document. So all the planning and hard work that took place is sitting there for 18 months. The later chapters of your specification document is sitting there for 18 months, waiting to be looked at and implemented in code. Think about that. That's a huge investment too far in advance for zero return. So instead, we now take an iterative approach. It's called Agile. You probably have heard of it, where we plan a little bit of work and then implement it and release it. And as we release, we learn from our release. Customers get to look at the features that we're implementing and give us feedback and let us, enabling us to make improvements in much shorter cycles. So what the product group does now is they do planning at different stages, right? The short-term planning is at the sprint, the 3-week level, and there's a 95% confidence in the outcomes of that planning. They also do planning at the 3-sprint level. The planning and the requirements are not as refined. They also do a 6-month plan with higher level requirements. They're not as detailed, and the same for the 18-month plan. As time goes by, they refine each of those blocks that you see on the screen. They just keep going to the next 3 weeks. They get refined and they get implemented and they get released, etc. So basically, the tighter the window of planning, the higher the confidence in the end result. In the early stages of Agile adoption, many development teams ship product to operations without regard for the limitations of the operations resources. Now, if you're part of a development team, you probably like this. Hey, I'm done with my software. Send it over to operators. Anybody seen this illustration before, where developers just throw software over the wall to operations? Now, but if you're part of an operations team, you're not going to be happy about that, right? To become a superior performing DevOps organization in terms of the DORA State of DevOps report, both teams have to share the same goals and timelines. Think about the 2013 Formula One team. Everybody, they were doing different things, but they all had one goal. And they were working together towards it. What DevOps works to do is overcome the contention that traditionally, or the traditional organizations face when teams have conflicting goals. Normally, development wants to be releasing often so that, I mean, that's how they get incentivized, right? Oh, you get bonuses if the application or the features are out on time. Think about a company that does e-commerce and they need changes to their application for Black Friday. Well, they want to put those changes out before Black Friday, right? They want speed. However, if those changes are not tested properly, they could even bring servers down, etc. And operations is blamed. Then they don't want that, right? So there's a conflict of interest. Development and operations teams are traditionally siloed and have little respect for each other's resources and commitments. I've seen that over and over in my years in consulting. There's an us versus them mentality. DevOps is a different way of working together where, much like in the video, people work in coordinated way rather than as independent mechanics. DevOps is a system to ensure that the contributions of operations and of development are aligned with overall company goals. It works to ensure that operations and development are not working at cross purposes. In a DevOps organization, operations staff are involved from the beginning and at all stages of the development cycle. Operations input is taken seriously and directly influences the budget, manpower, and infrastructure decisions for any application that is being deployed to production. Now, it's been proven that you can't change unless your culture supports the change. This is a quote from, again, Mr. Peter Drucker, the very famous business consultant of the 20th century, last century. Changing to a superior performing culture begins with a clear understanding of the culture you're in now. It has to be a conscious, intentional effort. You have to say, I want to become a high-performing DevOps organization. That's where you start in your organization, not individually. Once that is understood, the transformation can begin with a shift in practices. Silos are very common, and silos need to be eliminated. The Azure DevOps Product Group took this insight to heart. With management support and executive sponsorship, the team worked to adopt performance-oriented cultural practices. What I mean by that is that literally there were sometimes weeks where the business owners of the product said, okay, it is okay for you to not make any progress. Focus on improving practices, focus on improving the quality of the product. In other words, go slow to go fast, or slow down to go fast, right? And that is something that is more often than not very, very hard to accept, to do in an organization that's just so used to doing things a certain way. Now, there are, like I said earlier, many practices that are nested together and supportive on the road to becoming a superior performing DevOps organization. Which ones and their priorities depend on your organization. But there are far more than we have time to discuss here. I picked a couple to go through, and we should have enough time. We have the whole hour, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to focus on just a few that hopefully we'll have time to do some Q&A or discussion at the end. I would like to hear from you anything that I may not mention or I may not talk about. The idea is for you to get a working context on some of these practices, and I'm trying to cover both development and operations depending on your roles at your organization. You may be more familiar with some than the others, but anyway, we'll see. I'm hoping you get the most value out of it. The first practice I want to focus on is infrastructure as code. Anybody heard that before? Anybody doing infrastructure as code here on the call? It is the management of infrastructure in a descriptive model using version control to store the files. So you have a file that describes your infrastructure, and that file, meaning networks, virtual machines, load balancers, IP addresses, security configuration, everything is in a file that describes it. It's like a blueprint. And then that file is used to deploy the infrastructure. Managing infrastructure as code enables traceability, the review of changes prior to implementation. It also enables the automation of deployments in a reliable and repeatable fashion because it's not manual. If you're using infrastructure as code, most likely you have an automated deployment process in place already. Otherwise, the value of infrastructure as code becomes a lot less. There are many practices that are nested together and supported, like I just mentioned, right? Testing in production is one of them. Usage monitoring. Okay, let's talk about telemetry. Many applications do not collect telemetry. The Azure DevOps product collects telemetry about everything that happens, and it helps them troubleshoot and sometimes predict the behavior of your application. It can help you answer questions like, is my application crashing? Is my application fast enough? Do I need more hardware? Right. These are some screenshots of what the Azure DevOps product group sees in production. You don't want to find out about problems from angry customers, right? Testing in production is another practice. And it's very possible, but it requires a mindset shift. Right? Happy to talk about any of these. By the way, happy to talk about any of these topics further in separate sessions if anybody's interested or wants to go deeper on any of the topics. Continuous integration is another practice. Okay, there are many practices. I'm sorry, there's a misconception of what continuous integration is. Many people think that having built automation is what continuous integration is. And it really is not. Continuous integration is about continuously making an integer. That's what it comes from. Okay? The idea is that changes made by different people or even different teams get integrated with each other as frequently as possible. This enables identifying issues as early as possible, fixing of bugs while the code is still fresh in the developer's mind. And the automated builds that many people think is what continuous integration means. The automated builds, all they do is enable a portion of the validation to take place right after the code is integrated in an automated fashion. That's really what automated builds are. CI is not build automation. Now, you hear CI/CD, but there's really two definitions for CD. There's continuous delivery and then continuous deployment. Continuous delivery is finishing the product and having it ready to deploy. Continuous deployment is actually deploying it right after it's delivered. Okay, so questions to ask are like, does your developer check in once a day? Do they check in once a week? Do they have a main or trunk branch? Do they have a development branch, etc.? There are some practices or prerequisites for you to be able to do continuous integration. Basically, checking in regularly, automating your tests. You want to find out of any issues as early as possible. So test automation is a big part of it that most of the times we treat as a second-class citizen of delivering value to our customers. You saw what I mentioned after the video. There's with the minimum amount of predictable issues on the car when it goes back to the track. Right? Continuous deployment is another practice. A production-first mindset is essential for this practice. Basically, what you're thinking when you're writing the code is that this is going to go on production later today or tomorrow at the latest. And you can enable, there are certain practices that we're not covering here. Again, happy to talk about them, that enable a production-first mindset. Meaning, I'm done with the code. I've committed. I committed it. It got reviewed. Okay, send it to production. Let's test over there. Again, there's different practices that enable that. It doesn't mean that you're going to ship something with bugs or not properly tested, but you want to have it in production as soon as possible because there's no testing environment like production. Would you agree with that? Some of the practices when you're doing DevOps is that there's no deployment rollbacks. If you created value by writing software, you want it in production so that you get a return on investment. If something goes wrong with the deployment and you roll back, it's a waste of effort. The investment is not giving you a return. So the practice that the product group adopted was that there's no rollbacks. We fix it right away. And it's really easy when you're doing small chunks of planning, small chunks of features being completed and sent to production, because whatever went wrong, If it's a code bug, well, the code's fresh in the mind of the developer, or the scope of the work is not so big that you can afford to fix it. It's not going to take that long, rather than doing a rollback, which is a really, I mean, I've been there. I've been on weekend deployments and always fearing having to roll back.
Hey, Omar.
Rollback is bad. Yes.
Hey, sir, you got 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Yes, we're almost there.
All right.
Canary releases, right? Canary release means in production we have segments or segregated, and this works much better on software as a service applications. But I mean, it could work on-prem as well, where if you have 1,000 users of your application, you first send it to maybe 10% of them, and then maybe 100 or 10 even. And as the feature works well for them, then you start increasing the user base of your feature. So releasing incrementally, little by little, right? Again, happy to talk about these things. And we're wrapping up here now. Any additional thoughts? This slide should not have been here, but any additional thoughts from anybody? Comments? Apologize, I need to. I have some slides out of order. Let me bring it up. Bring up the correct next slide, please. Questions, comments, please. In the meantime.
My only comment is fantastic presentation. This was great stuff. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the feedback. Again, happy to talk about many of the other practices, anything that's specific to your environment. Just let me or Steve know if you'd like to talk more about DevOps or how to embark on your DevOps journey. Now, does this sound too good to be true? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a link inside the chat for a satisfaction or feedback form, if you will. So if you do want to learn further about this, just go ahead when you're giving feedback and put your email address in there, and we'll make sure we get you connected. Go ahead, Omar.
Thank you.
I do have to jump in a minute, so I'm probably going to stop the recording.
I think I have 2 slides left.
Okay.
You got my email. I'll put it back on there, or if you can put it in the chat, Steve, please. Does this sound too good to be true to anybody? Is this a unicorn to be in that situation? It is not. There are organizations out there, and it's proven by that study that happens every year. It's just that it's not a straight line. There's up and downs. It's a journey, but you have to be committed to it. And it's a journey that does not end. One thing that we miss very often, just like the angle of the camera on the video, is that just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're healthy. Things we're used to seeing things and deploy our applications, and we miss opportunities for improvement, right? Because we don't see them, or we put off a fire and the next day we have to focus on the next release and we forget about talking about preventing the fire from occurring again in the future. Thank you very much. Please, I welcome all kinds of feedback, constructive feedback, anything that I could do better, I value very much on this presentation. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Omar. It was an awesome session. Thank you for your insights, and go ahead and stop the recording, and I'm going to jump over to